Hello and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast, Focusing for Better Living. I'm your host, David Battistella. The wind has shifted, we have reset our sails and are exploring new horizons with a new focus on success, leadership, and all things interesting to have more clarity, more focus, and to live a considered life. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And visit our website at thefocusingway.com. Today on the Focusing Way podcast, we're taking things back to the body. Yes, that vessel that is the only ship we have to carry us through this life, and the body that we honor so much in the focusing process. Today, we welcome Julie Michelson to share her story and expertise. Julie Michelson is an autoimmunity wellness expert and functional medicine health coach who creates amazing transformations in the lives of her clients through her coaching business. Having gone through her own health struggles, she is excited to help her clients skip the hardships of figuring it out on their own and start living joyful lives of true wellness. Julie works internationally with clients in her remote coaching business, Julie Michelson Coaching, LLC. She has created the inspired Living with Autoimmunity framework to guide clients in making the changes necessary to reduce inflammation and optimize healing. And joining me now is Julie Michelson. Julie, welcome to the Focusing Way podcast.
Thank you, David. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I'm really excited about this episode. I just want to start. Could you tell me a little bit about your coaching philosophy and a bit about your process of coaching people?
Absolutely. The easiest way to describe it is that it's a holistic approach to wellness. So we go after all lifestyle areas, from diet to fulfillment and joy, everything that impacts our well-being and our health. And I use what I call a heart-centered approach. I come into every coaching partnership knowing that all of my clients are resourceful, creative, and whole, and they hold the answers. They just usually aren't in touch with them until we can get them out of their heads. So um, that's pretty much how I like to look at the big picture and all of the factors that impact somebody.
You just said a beautiful thing there, which touches actually focusing about, because focusing is a body process and we go to the body for answers. What have you learned about the answers through your clients and through the work you've done, but the answers our body holds for us?
They are limitless. And when I can get a client to come out of their head, and most of us spend a lot of time in our head, and drop into their body to search for answers, I've yet to see it fail. So our body holds amazing wisdom for us.
Yeah, that's so true. And what I've noticed is that people, when they just come into contact with their body and just acknowledge and just say hello, there's so much the body wants to tell us. So, could you describe a bit about what it means to be a functional medicine coach?
Absolutely. Again, it connects back to this holistic approach. The functional medicine approach to wellness is what we call a root cause medicine. So, for instance, I work at my specialty is chronic illness and autoimmunity, and traditional Western medicine treats the symptoms of chronic illness, but never addresses the root cause. Whereas functional medicine really searches for that root cause, and when you address that, amazingly, you can heal. So that's the approach that I take. That's kind of the lens that I see wellness through. And that's what has given me my health and my life back.
Let's talk about that for a minute because you come to your coaching practice and business from coaching yourself or learning yourself, taking yourself through a process. So maybe you could just share your story a little bit with our audience.
Sure, my pleasure. I was a newly single mom with three young children about 16 years ago, and I got ill and was lucky enough to get diagnosed within my first year of being symptomatic with rheumatoid arthritis. And when I was diagnosed, my doctors told me that there was no way that I could get better, but that they would try to slow my disease process and keep me as comfortable as they could for as long as they could. So I was given no hope and told nothing I did or didn't do would matter and just take my medicine and be a good girl. So that's what I did for about a decade. I continued to accumulate prescriptions. At the end of that decade, I was on 10 prescriptions. I still continued to decline and lose more and more of my life because I was too exhausted and too much pain to participate fully. And thank goodness now I know they were wrong.
Mm,
As you mentioned, I was initially self taught for to figure out what I could do to get better. I was really afraid I wasn't going to live to see 50. I celebrate. I just turned 51 and I feel, better than I did at 40 for sure. Um, and so through my experimenting and learning and healing journey, I decided that my life needs to be about helping other people heal and making sure everybody knows they can heal.
mm.
I don't want anybody stuck in that place where I was stuck of hopelessness. So you can heal if you're out there and you're struggling. You can heal.
I totally agree with that. Can you describe for me the you were at that time?
At that time, it was a struggle to get through each day. I had stopped working. I had to quit the master's program I was in. I stopped being a contribution to my community. I used to be really involved with my kids' school and PTA president and volunteering, and really wasn't able to have the energy for anything other than resting while my kids were at school so that I could at least be a mother, when they were out of school. So it was a really limited existence. I didn't have a lot of energy to put into my friendships and relationships. Um, I didn't want to drag other people down, and so it was kind of an isolating, small existence, if you will,
Mm.
at the time.
Let's take it step by step and see, or maybe you could describe, when did you realize, what was the moment where you said, that's it? This has to change.
I was in my 40s, and my daughter, who's my youngest, came to me and said, "Mom, please don't die and leave us." She'd been watching me decline, pretty much most of her life. And my dad had passed away at the age of 54, and obviously my kids knew that. And he'd seemingly been healthy until he left us. So this was a very real reality based fear. It wasn't a little kid being dramatic. And that's when it hit me. I had the same fear. So that's when it hit me. I have to do something. I still didn't really believe anything would work, but I knew I had to try. And so that was the beginning of my healing journey. Um, she really motivated me to reach.
What was it like for you to go away from what traditional medical doctors had told you and the diagnosis they had given you into another approach? Where did you start?
I started with diet. Um, I started with diet because serendipitously, My son was diagnosed with celiac. And so, in order to support him, I went gluten free, so that he'd have an easier time of it. And I noticed a small improvement in my joint pain. Come to find out later that I too am celiac and have been my whole life. So that reinforced that there is a connection. What you eat must matter, and that really began. I went from gluten free to grain free. I tried paleo, but I was doing it all wrong. I was kind of doing a lower fat, higher sugar. I thought I was doing paleo. And then I found Dave Asprey and the Bulletproof Diet and read his book. And that was really for me the beginning of learning, why certain foods are inflammatory and why I should try avoiding certain things and see how I can heal. And so I credit, and I tell him every time I run into him, I credit Dave with really my whole journey, because if it was, who knows, if I hadn't found Bulletproof. And that was an important step for me. Adding fat into my diet was a huge step. I grew up on a low fat diet. I raised my kids on a low fat diet. And that was the missing piece for me to really turn my health around, was to add, an abundance of healthy fats into my diet.
Mm. Yeah, that's switched around a lot for many people. We've been, certain generation have been drilled so efficiently on a no fat existence, that breaking that pattern in your own mind and exploring and going outside your normal to discover what was new is really important. But tell me a little bit about how long that process took for you from, when did you start to feel better and when did you start to say, well, that's working, let's go to the, and what was that part of the journey like?
For me, it was very experimental and very incremental. Um, there wasn't like one big thing that made a huge change. It took me several years to dial in the appropriate diet for my body, because at the time I wasn't educated on how to do that in a quicker manner. And then again, as it was like one change would make me feel a little better, my pain would get a little better. The last thing to come back fully was my energy, and that step was meditate. A regular, committed meditation practice
Hmm.
for me was flipped that switch. My All of a sudden, my sleep was more effective, and I'd wake up with energy in the morning, which I hadn't in over a decade. So that was remarkable. Um, and I still am playing with my health always
Mhm.
today. I'm always tweaking or trying or experimenting, because what I found is every time I feel the best I think I can feel, I something can help me feel even better.
Yeah.
So it's a never ending journey. But what took me years, I'm able to guide my clients in months. And that's my whole goal. That's the gift. I wish I had a functional medicine health coach, I don't know,
Sure.
10 years ago.
Absolutely. And that's also coming at a time when people are really beginning to understand functional medicine. So you've become sort of a gateway or a toll booth for people, like gathering all the data for them and then being able to present it in a easy and digestible way. What does it look like when a client comes to you? What is that? I noticed that you have a quiz on your website. Can you tell me a bit about the quiz?
Sure, the quiz is a great starting place. So many of us are not well, but we're not diagnosed, with some kind of autoimmune issue, or anything, which is another really big problem that people face, because after visiting doctor to doctor to doctor, sometimes people are kind of given the impression that it's all in your head, or sometimes they even have doctors who tell them it's all in your head. The labs are fine. You look
Mm,
fine.
mm,
So the quiz on my website is just a fun starting place for anybody who falls into the category of, oh, I'm just getting older. I was there. I know so many people that are there. We make excuses for our aches and our pains and our decline, pointing the finger at age. And so the quiz is it just age or is it inflammation? Because again, I want people to know there's things that they can do to optimize. So you don't have to be, cripplingly ill to come see me. I've got clients that are younger that just know they don't have the energy they used to.
Hmm.
And they would just want to feel better. So the quiz is a fun way to see what's going on if you have indicators of chronic inflammation going on in your body.
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on something really important there, which is the idea that these are sort of phantom illnesses or they're mental, and people are suffering greatly, maybe just because they've eaten the wrong thing every day of their lives and they haven't made a shift in a diet, or they haven't altered their movement, or they haven't put a practice in that makes them whole or complete. But I guess I just want to ask you about the tricky nature of autoimmunity, the kinds of diseases or conditions we see with autoimmunity, and the sort of tricky nature of it.
So the autoimmunity really runs the gamut. Of course, what I think of first are painful things like rheumatoid arthritis, because that's what I lived. But even diabetes, Alzheimer's, some cardiac conditions, and pretty much anything that you can think of that's a chronic illness has inflammation at the root, whether it's an actual autoimmune disease or not. Um, and what is tricky about them is that in traditional Western medicine, the kind of testing that's done again is really diagnostic. Do you have this disease? So we'll give you these drugs for your symptoms versus the functional medicine approach, which there's a popular saying in functional medicine that genetics load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger.
Mm,
And so our approach is looking for what are those triggers, right? It often is at least one of them is food. Toxins are another biggie. Even stress, which is a toxin,
hmm
um, is a big one. I have had clients come to me with their diets really dialed in, and they've done years of experimenting and testing, but their stress level is through the roof. Yeah. So there's just so many factors. And that is what makes it tricky. It's not one thing. It is definitely a bio individuality issue. But with functional medicine testing, we can identify that. And often just for me taking my long intake that I have with people, really gathering a lifetime of data,
hmm
even without testing, we can usually uncover, which are the appropriate directions.
That's an important thing here, because when we're talking about functional medicine, we're not putting traditional medicine aside. We're adding to it. There's a lot of science around this. There's data. There's a lot of, let's say in the biohacker movement, there are people putting a lot of data into this space now, creating big data around these illnesses, partly maybe because of the internet and people being able to share experiences in a way they haven't been able to before. But can you talk a little bit about the science around it?
We now know that the gut plays a huge role in wellness and especially in autoimmunity. And it's a really new science. But there is good data coming out, and most people with autoimmunity have what, in lay terms, we refer to as leaky gut, which literally means food particles are getting out of the GI tract and into the body and triggering an immune response. And, you know, we need an immune response. That's what keeps us healthy. But again, when you have this, chronic misinformation going on in your body, the best example, easiest example to understand is there's an autoimmune thyroid disease called Hashimoto's,
Hmm.
and many people with Hashimoto's, um, we've found that leaky people eating dairy that have Hashimoto's with leaky gut, the dairy is identified the same as thyroid tissue by the body. So think of dairy floating in your system, the body sends out the army, and oops, it's also accidentally attacking your thyroid at the same time. So those kinds of gut related issues where it becomes, find out the triggers, heal the gut. It's not magic. It feels like magic. But all of a sudden we can really heal. And I have yet to encounter many people, unless they've already done a lot of work, that don't have gut issues.
Mm.
And to clarify, it doesn't necessarily mean, you have got an uncomfortable digestive system. But when we can tell what's really going on in the body through testing, we can see what the gut is always involved.
And as you say that, it's people as they raise their awareness of their gut health, which is now being referred to as the second brain, because so much data is going between the brain and the gut, and so many receptors or messages are being sent between those two, and obviously the heart lung system as well. The interesting thing is, as you fine tune those systems in your body, people will tell you you're way more sensitive than you used to be, because you actually are. Your body starts to tell your brain, no, 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 that is not that is not something that needs to be inside this body right now. I would attach that to sort of a focusing practice where the body is speaking to us, and it's how are we listening? In what way are we listening? I just wanted to shift over to another, what people would consider a phantom thing. And I'll admit this, that I seriously increased this and didn't realize I even had a little bit of it until I read Dave Asprey's book, which is brain fog. So how would you describe it? And then maybe we could have a little conversation about brain fog.
I have very personal experience with brain fog. When I was at the height of my illness for years, my brain fog was so severe. That was actually the reason I quit the master's program I was doing, because I just couldn't retain the information. I'd be reading the same paragraph 5 times. And when it got that severe was when I really became aware of it. Brain fog kind of creeps in on people. And again, it's directly related to inflammation. And sometimes you don't know that you're experiencing brain fog until it lifts and you realize, oh my gosh, I feel so much sharper than I used to. I have yet again to meet anybody with chronic inflammation that doesn't have brain fog, to some varying degree. And it can really be crippling.
For me, it was that experience you just described, which is I didn't realize I could be sharper than I thought I was. And I was like, wow, I this has lifted another layer here, and I can really be in a sort of a sharp thinking process. And part of that came through a fasting process that I was in. Our fasted state, we think it's going to make us really lethargic, but it actually tunes our brain up a lot. That was my experience. And then I was trying to make sense of that somehow. And I went, of course, this makes sense, because if I was sitting in the middle of a forest and I hadn't eaten for 5 days, then my brain would have to be working really, really well to find the food. It's the opposite, where people say, well, if you didn't eat for 3 days or 5 days, you would be exhausted and on the couch and all of these things. But the opposite actually happens, because it puts you in a super sharp state. And with the food that's available to us now, there's so many invitations to invite inflammation. So can you talk a bit about what some of the trigger foods are that might trigger what your brain fog, or somebody typically could have brain fog, and the food that would trigger that?
First would be anything that I would consider a frankenfood, right? So processed foods, if it wasn't raised on the land or grown from the land, it's not really food, and our body doesn't recognize it as food. So anything out of a box is going to certainly have the risk of increasing inflammation and therefore creating brain fog. And then to pick on some specific foods that I see time and time and time and time again would be gluten and dairy would be the two top biggies, and the third being sugar. Um, you know, Sugar will spike your energy for a short period of time and then absolutely leave you in that brain fog state unless you keep feeding that dragon, which unfortunately so many of us have done at some point.
We know it's a losing game. You crash big at some point on that
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the injury you just experienced and your experience coming through that.
Sure. I experienced a brain trauma in January, and it was significant. It was a front of the head trauma. And so it impacted my physical energy, my memory, and actually gave me ADD like symptoms, which is not something I had ever experienced before. So, how I first described it, my first several weeks of recovery, was I had tunnel vision with ADD. So I'd be like hyper focused on whatever I was doing, but then easily distracted and then completely no recall of what I had been doing before. So I mean, it was a really interesting thing to experience. And I'm sure there was general brain fog in there. I mean, I went from in the first week or two literally repeating myself multiple times in a conversation with no awareness to slowly improving, where I would start to notice when I did it. I'd be like, oh, wait, I said that already. So that was an improvement. And the distractibility, I am 3 months out from injury, 3 months and 5 days out from
Mhm.
injury. And I am still recovering, and I will be for a few more months. Thank goodness. Oh, word loss was
Mm.
another really big symptom, which was very similar to what I experienced when my brain fog was really bad. By like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was like this black hole in my vocabulary. It's like I knew the word was there, I couldn't find it. Um, so all of those things really brought me back to, obviously the ADD for me was new, but I have a lot of clients with
Mm.
ADD and brain fog, and it's a real struggle. So for me, the gift is to be able to experience, kind of walk in their shoes a little bit, so that I can help them better moving forward, which is really how I went into and where I am in trying to heal my brain. Is I always look at it as it's going to always be an opportunity for
Mm.
me to help other people, as every health opportunity I've ever had has become.
Wow, it's so lovely that you would be generous enough to bring that in and to share that part of the story because there are always some things that we don't always want to share, but I really appreciate your openness in sharing that. And I guess that sort of brings me to the question of advocacy because, really, as a coach, as a functional medicine coach, do you take on the role of advocating for your client's health? Is that accurate? And would you describe that for me?
Yes, I consider myself a partner with my clients. And so I help them. I would say I help them advocate for themselves. I do. I always offer to, for my local clients, go to doctor's appointments with them. And some of what I find that I'm really there for, yes, for the memory part, again, that brain fog, they like to have me there kind of as a record. But what I end up finding is that I'm able to point out all of their improvements that they don't notice.
Mm.
Right. So they're going to sit with the doc and they'll be like, yeah, I'm still exhausted and I'm this and I'm that. And I get to be there and say, yeah, but you're only exhausted in the afternoon, or, I get to point out the improvements. And on a more kind of selfish for pure enjoyment part, once I've been working with a client for at least a couple, 2-3 months, their labs start to improve. And so I love to go and get the gold star, when the docs are so impressed that things that haven't improved in years are starting to move. But I'm also that person that, because I get more time with my clients than the doctors do,
Mm.
I get more information. I get information that people might not think is important enough to share with the doctor, or they might not remember
Mhm.
when they're sitting with their doctor. So I can help guide if additional labs need to be done, or new direction needs to be explored. So I am definitely a partner and a go-between,
Mhm.
and help them advocate for themselves in that way.
It's so lovely to give people that tool of empowerment, but to coach them through a process to their own wellness is just such an admirable thing to do. And it really takes a special quality of care to want to be that person. So, I'm really love that about what you're telling me. It's just lovely. So I wanted to just close out with a couple of this question, which is, from your years of experience now, what do you think are the things people can look at right away, really start looking at or examining or doing now to feel better and get to a peak state?
Diet is always the first easy. Most of us can find a place to improve our diet. And while I do believe that everybody's ideal diet is individualized, there are definitely generalities of what a plate should look like. So to go back to what I said before, if you're still eating out of a box, that's your starting point, right? I wouldn't expect everybody to jump to my ideal diet, depending on where you are. So first, cutting out processed foods, cutting out gluten, looking at your sugar intake, and seeing where you can cut that down. And I do believe, in some way, shape, or form, everybody's plate should be covered in vegetables, loaded with vegetables, with a reasonable amount of clean protein and a really good amount of healthy fat. That's all that needs to be on your plate.
You just described my dinner plate and my lunch plate every day. Yeah. I wanted to, and I like to do this because, well, first I'll just say, where can people go to find out more about you? Take the quiz. What are the best places to find Julie Michelson?
The easiest place is on my website, which is juliemichelson.com, and there's no A in Michelson. I am also on Facebook, Julie Michelson Coaching, Instagram, julie.michelson. I think if you Google your autoimmune coach, I pop up. So I'm out there. I'm all over the place. But come to my website, visit me. I would love to hear from people, and you can schedule a free call right on my website.
That's awesome. And I'll ask you this: is there anything out of this process or our conversation that I haven't asked that you'd like to share?
I want to reiterate really directly that everybody should have hope, that everybody can heal, and that none of us are alone.
Wonderful. What a gift you are. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, David. My genuine pleasure.
Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And visit our website at thefocusingway.com.